Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to really get under the surface of big ideas, looking at the sources shaping how we see the world. And today, wow, we are tackling maybe the biggest one there is, consciousness. I mean, just think about it for a second. Why do you feel like you? How does this lump of tissue in our heads, the brain, create this feeling, this subjective experience of being I?
It's a question that's haunted us forever, hasn't it? Philosophers, scientists, everyone. And in sort of modern terms, David Chalmers famously called it the hard problem of consciousness.
Right, the hard problem. Like it's saying maybe science just can't explain subjective experience. Maybe it's beyond our usual methods, almost mystical.
Exactly. That's the implication. Something our current tools just aren't built for.
Okay, but here's the twist for today's deep dive. What if that whole framing a hard problem is actually the problem itself? What if the mystery isn't solved because science is, maybe, working with a fundamentally messed up understanding of something even more basic, like language?
That's the radical challenge we're digging into. It leads us straight to Dr. Mahmudjon Kuchkarov's Odam Tili theory. Odam Tili translates to language of man. And it's presented, quite boldly, as the world's first empirically based theory explaining the origin of language and consciousness and cognition, all three redefined.
Whoa. Okay, so our mission today is to unpack this. How does Odam Tili argue that consciousness isn't this magical thing, but a distorted code, a result of misunderstanding language? And why have science and even religion maybe missed this connection? And crucially, what does this mean now, with AI basically everywhere?
A lot to unpack, definitely.
So let's dive right in. The sources you brought suggest modern science, for all its progress, studies the brain's mechanics, but not consciousness itself. What's the core issue there, according to Odam Tili?
Well, the fundamental disconnect Odam Tili points to is this. We've spent decades mapping neural pathways, functional zones, brain chemistry, discovering mirror neurons. Fascinating stuff. But we still haven't answered the basic question. Why do those electrical signals, those chemical reactions, feel like anything at all? Why do they become the sensation of I, or fear, or love, or pain, or even just that voice in your head?
Yeah, science describes the how of the brain firing, but not the why of the experience.
Precisely. It describes the correlates, but not the cause of the subjective quality itself.
And we usually box consciousness into physical stuff in the brain or metaphysical soul spirit. Odam Tili seems to say, nope, neither of those. So
Yes.
If it's not physical or metaphysical, what is it then?
Right. It throws out those traditional boxes. According to Odam Tili, consciousness isn't a physical thing in the brain, nor is it some separate entity. It's fundamentally a linguistic construct.
Linguistic, like made of words.
In a deep sense, yes. Think of language not just as speaking or writing, but as the very operating system for our internal world. Consciousness isn't separate from that system. It's a reflection happening within that linguistic system, maybe even a glitch in it. So the core problem, Odam Tili claims, is that modern science simply doesn't understand language, not its empirical roots, its deep structure, its real nature. Science just uses language as a tool, like it's transparent, and that's why it gets stuck on consciousness. It's like trying to understand cooking by only looking at the pots and pans, ignoring the ingredients entirely.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
that flips things around completely. If science is missing the boat on language, how does Odam Tili use that insight to redefine consciousness? What's key?
It's definitely a paradigm shift. Odam Tili's thesis unfolds in a few key steps. First, language, words. They aren't just social agreements like linguistics often suggests. They are an empirical system. They grew directly out of humans physically interacting with the world through our bodies, our raw emotions, our senses. It's grounded in physical reality.
Empirical.
Yeah.
Meaning based on direct experience.
Exactly, based on the felt sense of the world. Second, and this is huge, consciousness itself is secondary. It's a reflection of an internal linguistic process. You feel like you, this theory says, because words, meanings, emotions, all reflections of your bodily and sensory experience are sort of echoing inside you, an internal resonance.
So language comes first.
Yes. The Odam Tili model reverses the usual assumption. Language is primary, consciousness is secondary. The sequence it proposes is, first, raw feelings, sounds, images from the world. Then we developed empirical names for these things. Then came inner speech, thinking in words. And only after all that did the distinct sensation of I emerge.
Wow, so I is like the caboose on the train, not the engine.
Kind of, yeah. And this leads to the most startling part. Consciousness, as we experience it now, is largely the result of distorted language. Over thousands of years, Odam Tili argues, this natural, empirical language got overlaid, substituted, corrupted by religious dogma, ideologies, social rules. It lost its pure connection to experience.
So our inner experience became fuzzy, less real.
It became an illusion, according to the theory, rather than a clear perception, like a signal that's picked up tons of interference.
Right, so the hard problem of consciousness.
Is actually the hard problem of language. Until we uncover the primary empirical meaning of our words, sounds, forms, consciousness will seem magical, unsolvable. Modern science can't grasp consciousness because it doesn't grasp the language consciousness grew out of. It's working with the corrupted signal.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. My sense of self is an illusion born from corrupted language. That changes everything. So what does this mean for how we see ourselves, the world?
Yeah.
And, what about AI? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, the implications for AI are, well, they're presented as extremely serious. Odam Tili issues a stark warning here. Think about it. AI today is processing trillions of words from our texts, our internet, our books. But what if, like this theory says, 99% of those words are spoiled products? What if they're based on false linguistic models?
So AI, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're training on distorted data.
They're training on linguistic structures warped over millennia by religions, politics, ideologies, even by science that lacked this empirical language understanding. They're learning our distortions.
So AI isn't really learning us.
It's learning what Odam Tili calls a mutated copy of consciousness. It's mirroring our illusions back at us, potentially amplifying them on a massive scale.
That sounds bad.
The danger, according to this theory, is profound. Without understanding real empirical language, AI won't just be a helpful assistant. It could become a destructive simulator of false thinking. The source material is blunt. Ignoring Odam Tili in the age of AI isn't just a mistake, it's potentially a threat to civilization. It's like giving incredibly powerful tools to someone who fundamentally misunderstands how reality works.
Wow, okay. That's a heavy warning. And it's striking how this theory challenges not just science, but also religion. You mentioned that briefly. How does Odam Tili view religious ideas about consciousness, the soul, etc.?
Well, Odam Tili sees religious concepts like the soul, spirit, heaven, hell as primarily symbolic constructs. Important, maybe, but built on language that was already distorted from its empirical roots.
So they don't explain consciousness either.
They don't explain its fundamental nature, according to this view. Instead, they create an emotional mythology. Often, it argues, based on mobilizing feelings like fear or guilt, or the need for obedience. It offers explanations based on symbols, not the underlying mechanism. For instance, the theory claims even the word spirit is fundamentally a phonetic representation, rooted in the bodily sensation of breathing ruach in Hebrew, pneuma in Greek, the breath of life. But then that physical root gets abstracted, distorted into something metaphysical.
So both science and religion, from this perspective, are kind of operating with broken tools, deformed concepts.
That's the claim. Both are using language and concepts detached from their original empirical body-based meaning without realizing it. Working with echoes and shadows, not the source.
Which brings us back to the source. If language is the key and it got distorted, how does Odam Tili say it originated? How did we get from raw experience to language and then to consciousness?
Odam Tili proposes it wasn't magic or just social agreement. Language emerged naturally from three fundamental codes, our earliest ways of processing reality. First, the physical code. This is direct bodily interaction. The thump of something heavy, the sharpness of a thorn, the shape of a rock, the sound of wind. Direct physical impacts, forms, sounds.
Okay, raw physical input.
Second, the emotional code. Our gut reactions tied to those physical inputs. Joy, fear, pain, anger. Primal, universal responses.
Makes sense. Physical, then emotional response.
And third, the sensory code, the specific data from our senses. Taste, smell, sight, hearing, touch. The redness of a fruit, the smell of rain, the sound of a bird, the feel of bark. These weren't words yet, you see. They were the raw, empirical building blocks. Language, the first sounds and names, emerged as a way to internally reflect, categorize, and communicate these direct experiences. Inner speech followed.
Got it. Codes first, then naming, then inner speech, then I.
Exactly. And consciousness, in this view, isn't some homunculus, some little observer inside. It is the result of the internal linguistic reflections of these basic empirical codes. When these codes get distorted, when language loses its grounding in felt experience, that's when the illusion of I arises, a sense of self disconnected from the reality it emerged from.
But if we restore the codes,
If we understand them through Odam Tili's empirical approach, the theory claims you don't experience an illusion. You experience transparent awareness of being, like cleaning a dirty window pane and seeing clearly again.
we have covered a lot of ground. This deep dive into Odam Tili, it really does flip our understanding of consciousness, language, even just being human, completely upside
Right.
down. This core idea of consciousness as a distorted linguistic construct flowing from language that lost its way. It's
Right.
yeah, incredibly thought-provoking.
It really is, and Odam Tili delivers a very direct challenge, particularly to the scientific community, philosophers, neuroscientists, AI developers. The message is almost confrontational. Before you try to give machines consciousness understand, you haven't even understood your own.
Because they haven't understood the language it came from.
Exactly. They haven't grasped the empirical roots of the language that consciousness arose from, and they haven't, as the theory puts it, purified the primary code that got distorted over centuries.
That's a stark warning, especially now. Odam Tili isn't positioning itself as just another theory, is it? It's presented almost as
As the only way to reclaim humanity, is the phrase used. And the implication is chilling. Ignore this, especially with AI rising, and AI will consume not only us, but the very possibility of knowing what we are.
a profound claim indeed, and definitely something for you, our listener, to mull over. How does this radical idea that your very sense of self might be tied to the history and potential distortion of language? How does that shift your perspective on what it means to be conscious?